So we'll go ahead and get started. Adam, is that okay? Okay. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We're going to get started here on our second Project Advisory Committee meeting. We're primarily going to be talking about the public engagement plan and elements of the public engagement plan today. I've been told my connection is not great today, so I'm going to turn off my video as I talk. Let me see if it's any better. All right. So a couple of items I sent out to everybody, a few attachments earlier today. The first couple of attachments were the actual plan itself, the public engagement plan itself. There was a long version and there was a 2-page summary of it. And we will get to that in a second. That's probably a kind of a fairly long discussion. But I wanted to first talk about the platform that we're going to be using for surveys, because we have Maureen Brady on with us today, and she's helping us try to get the Lawrence Listens platform going. And we've had a few issues with it that I wanted to see if Maureen has any updates on. Primarily, one of the issues is with the logic, the skip logic that allows us to skip certain questions depending on if a person identifies themselves as a writer or a non-writer. So Maureen, any updates on being able to get that set up?
Yes, so we are able to do it. Thank you to Ashley in our MPO department. She helped me figure it all out. So we can do skip logic. They recommend when you do that, putting the first questions being the ones that everyone responds to. So I might recommend just moving the question order around a little bit. But we should be able to do all the skip logic parts of it.
Okay, so basically like the demographic stuff would go first. I think we have it last currently.
And I think there was the part where the system survey part, I don't remember what it was called.
There were some trade-off questions toward the end that were directed to everybody.
Yes, I think just moving those two parts up before the writer and non-writer questions.
Okay, great. And then the graphics that are going to go along with those trade-off questions, is there a particular format that you need the graphics in? Are JPEGs okay?
JPEGs will be fine, yeah.
Okay. And I assume it's easier for you if it's kind of like one JPEG per question, or can, because the way that this is going to be a discussion we'll have later, but right now we have graphics that both illustrate the question and illustrate the responses. Can you put in more than one JPEG into a question, or is it limited to just one graphic per question?
So I have to test it out, but the way we've done it before is the JPEG isn't in the question or the response itself. We do like a message beforehand, and that basically just means that we have more flexibility to put images into it. Okay. What kind of questions, like would they be like a selection, like a multiple choice question?
Yeah, there's two options for each. It's just a trade-off of if you had to choose, for example, between later hours or more frequent service, which would you select? That kind of trade-off. And so there's
they'd be classified as multiple choice questions then for the survey probably. So yeah, we'd probably have to do a message before the question itself and put the graphics in the message part. So it probably wouldn't be tied into the response options themselves. Okay. But I've been proven wrong by this platform multiple times. So I'll investigate that specifically and see if there is a way to do it that I just haven't figured out before.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll be in touch with you then tomorrow to, after we have this call tonight, we'll have a better sense of where everybody stands in terms of like if the illustrations make sense and stuff like that. So then we'll get in touch with you tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, great. So I don't want to hold you any longer than you have to be on with us. So next, I'd like to turn it over to Anne, and Anne is going to run us through the plan, the public engagement plan, the long version, but she'll sort of summarize that and the summary version. So I think you're on mute, Anne.
Mute. Okay. Yeah. Let me unmute. What we did is this plan. I've updated the graphic plan, the language on that based on our last meeting. The full plan I have not. That is pretty much the same one. Just so you know, don't look for differences in it from the last time, because we were going to. I think what we can do now is based on we had learned a lot from our meetings, I think, from the multimodal meetings, and that we had a kind of an immersion engagement, which I think all of you were on some of those this last week, some of those meetings. So we met with a lot of people, and a lot of questions actually came up about with the routes in that conversation. So one of the things we can do too is making sure there's a lot of stakeholders there that overlap here that are concerned about the route redesign as well as the facilities. So making sure that we have all those lists and that we help use that group that's very engaged with the group, any additional groups that you guys can help us add to it to make sure to push out the survey so we get everybody in those. Does that make sense? So it's a lot of it is the plan is designed like how do we keep pushing out the survey to get those answers, because that's where we're really going to get the feedback that we need. And we also want to make sure, I know when we do the surveys, making sure when we do those that people know that if that's the only survey, or that I believe there's another one going to come out in the fall, right? Isn't that right, Adam?
That's right. Well, we're going to have a survey. Yeah, we're going to have a survey to collect preliminary, just to get a baseline of people's views of the system and how they use it and their demographics. And then we'll have a second survey once we have service scenarios, so people can weigh in on those.
Right, and so and that in case is making sure that people know that this is part one and part two when we're sending it out too, that they make sure that they know that they're going to have the second part after this, so that they're going to be able to weigh in, so they don't think it, because a lot of times when we have multiple surveys and things, I'm not sure you guys have dealt with this. People are like, oh, I've already done that. I get that a lot when the second survey comes around. So we want to make sure that we really either call them different, make sure that's really separates so that they know this is survey one and there's a second one that's coming out. So it's a complete process. So we really make sure we complete that loop. So let me I'm going to pull up the graphic plan here first. Let me pull that up here. Let me share my screen. Okay. First. Of course, it opens the one I got. Okay. So can everybody see this? Okay, let me pull this up here. Oh, sorry. Okay. You can see that it got lost behind my stuff. Okay, so what we did is we went through this. This is kind of just the overview, kind of the graphic to help when we're talking to the community to kind of put that out there. We try to, especially on the left-hand side, we kind of rewrote these to be a little bit more engaging, and we can create this update them more. But these were like, what are our goals and our key messages, and making them a little more user-friendly. So what we want to do is our community engagement goals, and I'm going to read these because these are short, and so and you guys can jump, we can talk about them later. And the community engagement goals actually follow general planning goals and engagement priorities done by national engagement groups. So which are inform, consult, and involve, demonstrate, and partnerships. Those are all kind of areas of engagement by the international engagement platforms. So, but what I did is then we tried to define it so people understand what we're trying to do in each of these things. And the first one is inform, and with the transit route redesign, we'll make sure that the community is informed about the current routes, challenges, alternatives, opportunities, and possible solutions. The first is to make sure we're informing, and that's pretty much what we're going to be doing at first. And then the consult and involve, which is our survey, by obtaining feedback on current routes, alternatives, needs, and destinations. The redesign will ensure that concerns are addressed and objectives are understood and considered. So we want to make sure that we're going to make sure that people are involved in that, and then we're going to demonstrate that community input is a key to the process and will reflect the community priorities in the decision making and planning. And last thing is to build partnerships. And this is not as, I think the other ones are more key to this, but the partnerships is recognizing that the effect that this effort has on the community. Those partnerships will be built with other agencies and stakeholders to complement other community initiatives. And part of this building partnerships is in our stakeholder list and getting this out and pushing it out to all of our at-risk groups, making sure that people, if they aren't on a computer, that they can fill it out, that we get people from the community shelter and from the jobs for people that have the high employment or the employment centers. So all those areas, when we in the initial part is when we reach out to them to make sure we're filling the surveys, we're including them in the process, and we're building partnerships as we move forward, that if there's concerns and things down the route, that we have this partnerships, we've already established a communication and possibly how people can help us with this. And then those are then all reflected in the key messages, which are, and we kind of highlight that. The first one is mobility, safety, and economic benefits. It is important for Lawrence to have a safe, connected, and convenient network to increase mobility, safety, and economic benefits for all ages and abilities. We want to have increased access through convenient connections to public transit. The Lawrence community increases access to employment, schools, and services, and that access provides multiple benefits to the community. We also want to have inclusive and equitable, meaning that it is important to hear from all voices in Lawrence in the route redesign, making sure the whole community is considered and consulted, and it is inclusive and equitable. And then the unified vision for the routes is that the Lawrence Transit route redesign will build upon previous and local regional planning efforts to create a unified vision for routes throughout Lawrence. So that's what those are kind of the key messages to the public that we want to make sure we're always talking about, and that we're engaging them to make sure that we really get their input. And then on the right-hand side, it's more kind of the how we're going to do it through our steering committee, through our stakeholder focus groups, through our virtual public meetings, the transit surveys, and that's why everything there is bold, because that's really key. And then informative communications tools from notices, flyers, email notifications, all those things driving people to the transit survey to get that feedback. So that's kind of the one-pager community plan. And then on the back of this, and we can come back here and discuss this one second. And on the back, we have our stakeholders. And this is the starting list of the stakeholders. We can add to this, we can expand upon this, we can combine things, but this is based on a lot of what we are using for the facilities is what I took this from, but we can add to it. So that's kind of where we are. And so this I really would like, because this is kind of the overview of it, and it's kind of the other kind of goes in more into the other details, but this is where I really like to discuss is, are these the key messages? Are we missing any other key messages? Do we feel like these are the key messages that you want to get out?
And there was a comment in the chat. I don't know if you saw that.
I have not. Let me pull up my chat here. I don't have that. Trying to get all these things up here. Hold on.
And this is Chris Tilden. I had just added, I mean, I'm not questioning the messages per se, just kind of wondering about language. In that first one about mobility, safety, and economic benefits. I just wondered if that should read convenient transit network or convenient transportation network, just for additional clarity. Instead of
saying maybe convenient transportation network to increase, yeah, like that is what you're thinking. That might not be bad to put the word transportation in there. So.
Do people confuse transportation to mean all transportation though? And this is really about transit, which is just a part of transportation in general.
Do we say a convenient transit, or do we say convenient bus network, if you want to be?
That would be a more accessible message, I think.
I would use transit. Sorry, just to weigh in, I would vote for transit, just because what comes out of the study may include more than traditional bus service. It may include microtransit service, which some people view as bus and some people don't. So I think it leaves it open to more possibilities if we just call it transit network.
Okay.
Unless anybody disagrees.
I just thought transportation includes too many other things like traffic.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
I have one other input. Would key messages maybe sound better as something like project values or goal? I mean, I know that goals is in the top one, but something, I feel like key messages doesn't really describe this exactly. Yeah, that too. Yeah. I think more accessible language to all the people who might be reading this could be good.
Priorities, maybe it's priorities,
I like priorities. That sounds good.
This is Gary Weber. I had one quick suggestion. I couldn't see how these were prioritized, how priorities were listed in order, but in any change like this, it always comes up halfway through that people complain they weren't informed. So I think inclusive and equitable should be higher on that list than third out of 4. It's really important to people that they have a voice when a major change like this occurs. And I think one of our major priorities is to make sure that everyone has a chance to have a voice.
We honestly, I had not put them in a specific order. I'm just trying to make sure we included everything. So I think that's a good note. We put that we just make that our first priority. I'm not going to number them, but we'll put that at the top. And then, so if that's our first one, does anybody feel like should the increased access? I mean, does anybody feel like one of the other ones should be our second priority? Or be listed as our second priority, not that it is a second priority?
If I was going to order them, I would put inclusive, then increased access, and then economic benefits, and then the unified vision.
Okay. Does anybody does that feel right to everybody else?
That looks very good to me.
I don't know if this matters or not, but if you did start with inclusive and equitable, and then you went with increased and then mobility and then unified, you're listing them alphabetically while also listing inclusive and equitable at the top. So just FYI, I don't know if some people get into that or not, but
that works for me too.
So I would just
so depending on who we're talking to, we can say, well, we did it alphabetically, and if they didn't like it, and then if they like it, we'll say that we did it because inclusive is our most important priority.
So I would just offer that I think we just need to be thoughtful about this page. Tells me that we are going to strive to be inclusive and equitable. I think people are going to care about how. So I think we should just be thoughtful about how this ties to the larger document, and making sure that we don't just in broad strokes say we want these things and don't commit to specifics about how we get there. So let's just, I know we can't fit all the how on a 2-pager, but I just want to be thinking of that and not just using the good words, but backing that up with kind of how we're going to get there. How are we going to be inclusive? How are we going to increase?
I agree. And one of the things, Adam, I think is looking at our second page too, is looking at our stakeholders, because if we know, making sure that when we're looking at our stakeholders list, we could reach in different ways. But if we have anybody that's not, these are the people we want to reach. Is there people, are there stakeholders on this list that are missing, that we want to make sure we reach, to make sure we are being inclusive and getting all those things? So that would be really helpful for everybody. We don't have to go through this now, but if everybody to really look at this tonight and see if there's a group or and we can get, this can be, is a much more detailed too. It could be specific organizations. I mean, we can talk about, do we want to have the Boys and Girls Club on here? Do we want to have, so specific things? Do we want to have family promise on here? Do we want to have specific things? Those we can do. That's what I would like to, so we can have these with subheads too. But that's the kind of thing I would love from this group. And that's why it's great that this steering committee is large and diverse too, is to make sure, let's talk about, we have about specific organizations that we can reach out, make sure that they are getting the survey, and we can talk to, Family Promise and ask Dana to say, can you make sure, here's, they've got a computer there, so she can make sure her clients all fill out the survey, those sort of things. Does that make sense to you guys? Can you do that?
One other.
This is Laura McCulloch. I was just going to mention, I know this is something I brought up at the last meeting, the Hispanic population. I think that's important, but I also don't want it to seem as though we're singling out only the Hispanic population. I think that all BIPOC populations should be considered as a priority in getting feedback. But also the Hispanic population was kind of a point in that Spanish is, a second main language in our community, and making sure that we're surveying and getting feedback from those that are Spanish speaking in our communities. I am a little concerned that we haven't identified an organization to work with to get that feedback from. However, I know that Centro Hispano would be a good one to try to work with. I know that they're very busy, so maybe that we could try to connect with them to get some feedback as well.
That would be great.
Do we plan to do a Spanish version of the survey so that if it goes out and there's an option for English or Spanish, it would be easier for people to access it?
We could do that, but we couldn't do it in time for the university version of it. But I assume the university one.
No, I wouldn't be worried about the university push out as I would for in general.
Yeah. Okay. We could do a Spanish version for it once we get the university one wrapped up or launched, I should say.
Can you tell me what was the name of the Spanish organization, or can you put that in the chat, the name of the organization? That would be helpful. And again, and anybody could put into this chat if you have any other organizations. But again, looking at this, and then if you have another thing too, that would be helpful is if you have specific organizations and if you have a contact person or something at those organizations, we can go look them up. But if you have somebody specific, that would be very helpful. Yeah, United Way, perfect.
Other thought, going back to the first page, is I think we should find a way to demonstrate timeline of the project to people. As a citizen, I would wonder how, as I look at this flyer, how do I get involved?
Okay.
I think we should, we need to link to our project page, and we need to set some expectations for the public on when they should expect to get involved. I know some of that will come with further development of the survey, and we'll know launch dates and things like that. But I think that'll be important for, people see all these different things that we are doing, steering committee, stakeholder groups, virtual public meetings, but knowing how to access those things or how to plug into the process. If you see this flyer today, or if you see it 2 months from now, how do I get involved in the route redesign study?
Okay.
This is Gary Weber. I had one other comment on page 1, transit survey. We touched on this earlier. This is actually plural, as from what I can read in the full document, that there will be this survey, there'll be a follow-up, and maybe even a third survey. So I would think that you'd want to say transit surveys, and that the surveys will provide insight into community. That way people will know that there's going to be more than one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and we can detail. Survey 1 is going to be doing this, and so like Boris said, survey 2 will be doing this. Kind of list what those.
I don't know if that's necessary at a 2-page level, but it would be nice in the full plan.
Yeah.
Is that where you would put the links to know what survey to get to?
Well, the survey links aren't the. No, I don't think that we would necessarily have links to the survey in the document, because the links are going to be created as we go. So I don't think that we would, I mean, we could have a general discussion about Lawrence Listens as a platform to host. Go ahead, Margaret.
I didn't want to interrupt you. I'm sorry. What if we added the link to the document as the link surveys go live, so that, I mean, a PDF can be updated, and we could add that so that as the links are live, we can say this link, this survey is open now.
Sure.
Here you go.
Yeah, we could definitely. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, are we going to have a page though on the city website that is about the route redesign? To me, that this would be situated there, as well as then the links to the surveys that are the active surveys at the time.
So what I would suggest is a link to the project page. We want people to be visiting the project page to catch up on what's been done and what's upcoming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the better. So we'll have a schedule, and then we'll have a project page link for people to go to, and then this will be on that page link as well if people have it separate. But this is for and this is kind of going to be the overview of people asking, well, what are you doing? This is our engagement. This is what we're doing to engage and make sure people are included. But if they want more detail, they obviously can see the other plan. But sending them to the website, which is going to have what's happening and have your different links and have the surveys is what is the central source.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think that since we're 30 minutes in, I see there's still comments that are continuing to come in, mostly suggestions for how to get into. Yeah. Okay. So we'll look through all the comments that come in, and we'll continue to. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So we'll continue to take. Oh, did somebody have a comment or question? No. Okay. So feedback can be anyone who's on this call can always email either Ann or me. Even probably Adam could forward comments to us as well. So we'll continue to collect feedback from the steering committee, from the advisory committee for the next few days as we make these updates. So if anything comes to mind over the next couple of days, please feel free to send an email. But in the interest of time, I'd like to jump into the discussion of the survey, because that is actually going to be the first outreach and engagement element of the project. And if you recall from our last discussion, we're going to launch it sort of in two parts. First, we're going to launch it directed at the university community, because we want to make sure that happens before school gets out for the summer. And so we hope to launch the survey directed at the university community next week. And that's what the discussion earlier with Maureen about Lawrence Listens was all about. I sent this morning a list of questions in a Word document, and it's not the prettiest of things, because I was hoping that maybe we could have it in Lawrence Listens, but it's not quite ready for that. So I'll just really briefly talk through kind of the aim of the survey, and then I'd like to spend a bit more time talking about the trade-off questions that are going to be illustrated at the end of the survey. And just like the public engagement plan, if anyone wants to look over the survey questions and provide feedback by email in the next few days, that would be great. Overall, though, the survey is trying to establish kind of the demographics of the riders, who they are, how they currently use the service, what they'd be describing kind of their typical trip, when they take it, where they go, where they begin. We asked them some questions about if transit were not available, or if their specific route were not available, how would they make the trip otherwise, just so we can kind of get a sense of, I guess, for lack of a better term, what the competition is or what the alternatives are to transit. There's questions about the quality of the service, about if they think that it's a good value, if the fares are a good value, if it's dependable, if the schedules meet people's needs, and so on. But then as far as the design goes, because that's kind of really one of the main takeaways of this survey. We want to understand, we want people to understand, first of all, that there are going to be trade-offs in the process of redesigning the transit system. Every transit system has to work within finite resources. They have budgets that they have to keep to. And so we want to present them with this notion that there will be trade-offs and present a series of trade-off questions. So in the document that I sent this morning, it's questions 15 through, or I think it's question 15 actually is where it begins, and it's asking a series of questions. So I'm going to share my screen and we can talk about those questions as well as how we propose to illustrate them to make them a little bit more clear to folks. So let me figure out how to share my screen. Okay, share screen. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this part of the survey starts out by, again, reiterating that the trade-offs are going to be required, and we direct some instructions both to riders and non-riders. We want the riders to know that if they're currently using the service, what would they like to see? How can we improve their lives, so to speak? And if they're not currently using the service, we want them to think of it in the sense, or in terms of what could we do to win them over, to make them riders. And so there's a series of questions. The first one asks about the overall bus service. And the way that this is set up is the first illustration was supposed to go along with the question itself. Like it would say overall bus service, and it would have this icon. But I'm thinking, based on Maureen's comments, we may end up dropping this part of the illustration and just stick with the illustrations to the responses. So we would have, would you prefer longer service hours, or would you prefer more frequent bus service? So this is supposed to illustrate longer hours. So it's like, here's the clock and we add to it, or these are points in an hour, and we could have more frequent service. So any thoughts on how well or not these illustrate this concept? And does everybody understand the trade-off there?
Hey, Boris, this is Quiz. I understand it when you're telling me, but if I saw 2 clocks, I don't know that I would understand it, but that's just me.
So do you think that we should, okay, so we can add a longer kind of narrative description, or not really description, but a discussion of the trade-off itself. So longer service hours means that a bus is available to you longer into the night, potentially. Okay, go ahead.
I want to say that I think removing the image that goes with the question will help make it clearer what the other images mean, because when I looked through these, the question ones just made it harder to understand than otherwise.
Okay.
But maybe like on this one, I like the A clock, but I think having it appear like a stopwatch makes it harder to understand. Making it look like a normal clock would be better without the button on top.
That's a good thought. Yeah.
And
for like longer service hours, I think like a sun and a moon and stretched out time, like arrows both ways. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good too.
I made a 24-hour clock for an image for a presentation for international students that I may just send you for a reference, because it had the different times of day and might be helpful for how this clock concept could work better.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how to make the concept of the more frequent bus service more apparent in this clock. I think it's a good start, but I don't think it quite gets you where you want to go unless you have something that indicates what you have now, which is like every 30-minute service, and then the addition of extra stops at 15 and 45 being more obvious that that's new, and the other one is the existing.
Okay, maybe something like draw a bus here and a bus here, and then draw like an arrow showing a bus being added here and being added here, or something to that effect?
Maybe using the plus symbol that you have in the other clock where the ones are new. Because if you make that more similar about you're adding it this way or you're adding it this way.
Okay. That's good comments. All right. Then the next question is asking about the trade-off between more weekday service and more weekend service. So here we have a plus for weekdays, and here we have plus and plus for weekends.
This is Laura, my colleague. This isn't necessarily a comment on the graphics, but I'm just thinking as somebody who doesn't ride the bus, like having available the general information about what currently is in place might be helpful when making a decision, since this will be answered by all respondents. Like I didn't know that current bus frequency is like 30 minutes, or I don't know necessarily hours of the transit. So other people might not necessarily know that either if they don't ride the bus. So it might help them to make a more informed selection as far as the two different options in each choice.
Do you think it would make sense to, under the question, have a link saying for more information about current schedules, go here, and then link to their schedules?
I think it might depend on what is being asked and what you're linking them to. I don't know that everybody will click on a link. So if there's a way to kind of show it at a high level, that might allow people to answer. I don't know that everybody will click on a link to go to another page to read if it's like a page where they have to scroll to find information. So if it's easily identifiable, that might be better. But if if the web page takes them directly to what they need to know, that could be okay as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe part of the problem here is that, like this question, you're talking about more weekday service versus more weekend service really means adding Sunday, right? So maybe it's more weekday service or add Sunday service. And I know we have this one about reducing Saturday, but I honestly think maybe the Saturday, Sunday question should go before the more weekday versus more weekend, so that this question doesn't become muddied up by the other one.
We could drop this question altogether if you think that it's just more confusing than it's worth.
Well, Boris, one thing I wanted to add on this one, on the letter A, the green plus sign implies more weekday service, like you're adding on the green, but on the B, we're plussing, but the color's red. I understand the pluses, right? But it almost means the pluses on the B should be green if that's what you're adding.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So
if the question stays in. Yep.
Well, let's take that one step at a time. Margareta, you brought this up, but do you think that it would be worth just removing this question? Do you think that'll make it simpler?
I sort of feel like combining the two may be the better way to go. You get more weekday service or more Sunday, or you get added Sunday service, and simplify that. I realize the trade-off in the other question is about reducing Saturday, but for the sake of this survey, I feel like we would get more.
Okay, so more weekday
that's
service.
Really something that Adam should weigh in on, since this is more about things that the city service than KU.
I guess my question is, how much time do you want to spend nitpicking all of these icons versus talking about the concepts and letting staff go back and work with some specific, get it right the way staff feels it's comfortable, and then also run it back by the committee, like through an email or something. I just don't know what your timeline is for what else you need to get done tonight.
Yeah, well, this was going to be kind of the last topic, but okay. I'm fine with that approach also, because again, everybody can provide feedback by email. The only thing I'll say is we do need to wrap this up this week because we want to launch the survey next week. Regarding the question or the comment about providing people information about the existing schedules, so that'll vary, based on service, based on day, but there's a lot of variables on what the schedules are. So it's not it's not something that readily that we can easily put onto a single bullet point next to a question. I think we can link folks to schedules for sure. We can say, if you're curious to know what the schedules are on particular routes, go here. So
what about one sentence that says currently service happens Monday through Saturday?
So that would take care of the this one, but it wouldn't take care of this one about.
No, that's true. I mean,
yeah.
But that I think we staff could work with you on a one sentence descriptor that helps provide that context that people might need.
Okay.
Yeah. So the service hours, I mean, is it typically like a certain like start time to end time during the week, or does it vary from day to day? I mean, because that sort of information I think would be helpful just to provide right there.
Yeah, the service is 6 to 8 Monday through Saturday. I mean, it's pretty simple to provide a one-line context.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Okay. So we'll I'll ask staff you guys to provide kind of your recommended intro sometime over the next couple of days, but let's continue with the concepts. As Jessica was saying, okay, so we did this one. The next concept is more bus stops for shorter walk distances to and from bus stops, or fewer bus stops for faster bus service. So the idea there is, if you have fewer stops, once you're on the bus, it can travel faster, versus if you have more stops, it's a slower go, but then once you actually get off the bus, you're closer to your destination, or if you're at an origin, you're closer to a bus stop. Does that concept make sense to folks?
I think this one looks really good.
Okay. All right, then we'll move on. So the next one is somewhat similar, but not exactly. So it's buses running on more streets, but less frequently on any given street, or buses running more frequently, but on fewer streets. This is the concept of key corridors, where you sort of invest heavily into a few key bus corridors in your community, but then people have to walk a bit further to get to those corridors. So does the concept make sense? And any thoughts on the illustration?
I think you need more streets to make this one more clear, like a grid of 5 lines instead of 3, so that you have something that's more clear on the difference.
So, I'm gonna throw this out there. Your street network, take away transit service, your street network would not change. Your street network is your street network. So we want to make clear that we're talking about the same Lawrence community.
Yes. I'm talking about this being, these intersections don't look different to me. They're the same size. If you look at the 4 corners of A, they have the same information as the 1 corner of B, theoretically. And so I think more lines will help make that more clear. I don't know. It's just my opinion.
Or Boris, you could also just on the text on question B, maybe put in parentheses key corridors. I don't know if that phrase helps explain the picture better, but
yeah.
I guess, I'm wondering from a regular person standpoint, if this question, if the question before this, these are essentially the same question. I mean, it's really sort of getting to the frequency of service and the speed of service. And I think number 6 makes more sense to me from a non-urban planner standpoint than number 7.
They're a little bit, they're a little bit different. I mean, I'm glad that you said that they seem very similar, because we want to convey the difference. I think it's an important distinction between them. If I can sort of bring this concept into this graphic, so you see you have all these buses. So all these buses could have a stop here, here, and here, which would make potentially the bus stop every single block. Or it could just have one stop here and no other stops until you get here. So that would allow the bus to speed up and travel along its path before it has to stop. So that's what this is trying to illustrate. Now, this is asking, would you do that, what I just described, would you do that just on a couple of key corridors, or would you do it all over the city? The difference between these two is this impacts how much, if you have service on a lot of streets, you need a lot of buses, which busts your budget. If you have service on fewer streets, you can provide more frequency with the same number of buses. That here you would have those buses kind of, you'd spread them very wide, far and wide. And so the result would be the bus comes along less frequently on any given street. This one is talking about where do you place your shelters or your stops. So it's a concept of infrastructure supporting your service versus the service itself.
Hey, Boris, this is Quiz. I'm going to be kind of snarky here for a second. Are you going to be available for comments when people are filling out the survey? Because honestly, and I'm saying that because they're going to have some questions about trying to understand what the diagrams mean on just a lot of these. And I'm almost wondering, and this is just me, is it better just, I mean, do we even have to have the pictures? Can we have text that better explains what we're trying to do instead of maybe a confusing illustration? That's just something to consider, but I also know folks wanted graphics put in this as well. So
we could do either way. I mean, if there's some sort of consensus that we should use our real estate for providing more descriptive text, we could certainly do that. Maybe we do both. We provide more description plus keep these illustrations. So any other thoughts on which way to go?
I agree that this frequency coverage of service, as even listening to your explanation of it, I'm like, I really don't. It doesn't explain to me. So at one point you said something about more buses running on more streets, but less frequently. And so maybe the clarifier, if this is one that needs to stay, is something regarding the more buses versus fewer buses running more frequently. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what would have helped that.
Hey, Boris, can I take a run at this?
Okay, go ahead, Adam.
So I know we've been talking about buses. This is really a question of more or fewer routes is what we're talking about here. So question 6 is about more or fewer stops. 7 is about more or fewer routes. And the fewer routes you have, the more frequently the buses can come on those routes. So there probably is some stuff we can do text-wise to explain that better, but that, talking about more streets and more buses, I think confuses this. We're really talking about the number of routes that we're able to put out.
Routes. This is Gary Weber. I'm like Quiz. When I read this morning, the first thing that came to me is these illustrations are superfluous. A good textual description of what you want is adequate. And I'm kind of feeling more and more along that line. So that was my first thought. If you just write a nice sentence that explains it, you don't need the illustrations. But I use the bus frequently, and I understand these concepts. So maybe that's a problem.
I want to add that I think that some people are visual. I spend a lot of time talking to users of the bus who don't understand how to read the schedule, who don't conceive of north and south. And looking at a picture works better for some people, and looking at words works better for some people. So I feel like having some images could help some people, especially on print surveys. And that it should be everywhere to be consistent, but I do feel like some of these are a little obscure.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's do the last couple, and then we can maybe circle back and see what the final, if we have a consensus.
Hey, Boris, sorry, real quick again, just on 6 and 7, and maybe Adam's points might help it out. Instead of the title on 7 being frequency / coverage of service, maybe it should be what Adam suggested. Less frequency equals more buses, or changing the title a little bit may help it as well. All right, I'm done.
I think that what's lost in this, and yeah, like in a public meeting, we could definitely, it's helpful because we can explain these concepts in greater detail, because if we assume that we have the same fleet, like we have a finite fleet to work with, we have 10 buses, we can either throw those 10 buses out onto 10 different routes, and then the bus comes once an hour on each route, or we can throw in all of those buses on one key corridor, and then you have 10-minute service frequency, so buses are coming every 10 minutes. It's the same number of buses, it's just a matter of how wide do you cast your net.
Right. And Jessica's suggestion too about adding a I don't know may help make this survey more valid, instead of somebody just guessing an A or a B if they didn't know. So
okay, yeah, I don't know or no preference. Okay.
Yeah, it does become a little challenging, because even when you look at this one, the comment made about the picture of the network itself, B looks, like, oh gosh, there are a lot more buses. And actually what we're talking about is the same number of buses, one distributed across a broader network. And that's not real clear in this picture. So.
Yeah. Okay, let's get through the others at least, so we can talk about the concepts. We'll sort of the pictures will be sort of secondary. We'll come back to whether we want to include them or not, but the concepts themselves. So the next trade-off concept is whether we want to serve new areas or improve existing service. So this is often an important question to get the attention of non-riders, because non-riders sometimes say, oh, I'd love to use the bus, but it doesn't come into my neighborhood. So do we improve service where it is now as a priority, or do we reach out to additional locations as a priority? And I'm sure if all that was written here, you guys would be much happier.
But I think generally the concept is pretty clear with this one.
Yeah, my only comment though is with service. Sorry, this is Laura McCulloch. With the service is that it doesn't really get at what service means. I mean, the other questions is clear. We know specifically what you're getting at, whether that's the hours or more routes or things like that. And so I just would try to make it clear about what exactly we're talking about. That's the same comment I have for the next one as well, really, about what does service mean?
Okay. Would it make more? Oh, go ahead.
This, do you mean more new destinations or new origins, as opposed to just? Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So would it be more clear if we said something like invest resources into making existing service more frequent, or put that in parentheses or something, to clarify what we mean by improve existing service?
Or even more frequent service on existing routes.
Yeah, something like that. That sounds good.
Okay.
And for A, you could have extend routes into new areas.
Okay. All right. Then this last one is talking about fares. So a fare-free system with reduced service levels versus maintain existing service levels and really existing fares. So that the point here is that you can go fare free, but bus service isn't free to operate. So it may mean reducing service levels to be able to afford to go fare free as a system. This is a tricky one to present, because a lot of people aren't thinking of it in terms of the budget that the agency has to work with. They're thinking about it sort of their own experience. So I'd love to get your.
Well, that might be where those one sentence descriptors that we would write might be helpful, because we could say fares make up X percentage of our operating revenue, operating expenses.
Okay.
Here's how we.
Yeah, I think another thing that might help is these two seem, in most cases, I felt like the explanations were parallel. Like one was serve more areas and then improve, existing. Whereas this one, they seem less parallel. And perhaps it could say something like, implement free or reduced fares with lower service levels and retain existing fare, system with, I know these words aren't good, but make it a little more parallel by saying, we'll either design a system with reduced or no fare, but that means I don't know that I'd use reduced. I mean, in most cases, I don't think one said, oh, we're going to reduce it. In this case, we're going to continue to keep it. It seems like there's a little bit of a value judgment.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But speak to the fact that, yes, there would be lower levels of service if we were to have a reduced or fare-free system, but make them a little parallel. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that comment. And also, this is an area where the service levels just doesn't tell me what is being reduced or what is being maintained necessarily. So maybe talking about like the routes, or, just like giving examples of what you mean by service. If there's a specific service that would be reduced, what is that? Or otherwise just say, in parentheses, service levels may include, or something like that, so people know what exactly it is.
Okay. All right. Good. So I think that was all useful feedback. I'm not sure how we can do a very quick poll, but I'm just curious. Maybe does everybody have like a raise hand feature on their thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm curious to, let me stop sharing and see how many people think that we should scrap the images altogether.
Well, I just wanted to ask a question, because is the images partially for people who have low literacy? If so, then I think that's a consideration we need to make, and try to make the images more accessible for people.
But
yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
The problem is interpreting the images. Once you explain them, they understand, but how's someone else supposed to figure that out?
Could we possibly also like record us talking about what the image? I don't know if that would help at all to explain some of it or not. And I don't know that anybody would watch it.
Go ahead,
What
Margareta.
if we give some feedback to Boris about how we might change a few of them, and then send them back to the whole group with some changes to see if they seem clearer to you before we go to that extreme. I have some ideas that are not about concept, but about how they read. And so I'm saving all of those to just send to Boris and in turn the staff folks directly, to not waste everyone's time.
I agree with Margareta, because I think that we've talked not just about the images, but also about some of the words being used. And I think the literacy level hits a little high in some of the sections, but we talked about those. And so taking an opportunity to adjust some of the wording, and there were some tweaks to some of the images, but I also agree that having those images for visual interpreters or learners, as well as maybe people with lower literacy rates, helps to reinforce some of the concepts, even if they're a little bit obscure, a little bit challenging. I think it does add to it.
Right. And I also want to add that the survey is going to be launched, I guess you can call it a soft launch if you want, with the university next week, but the rest, the general population will be introduced to this survey together with the first public meeting or virtual meeting, which will be at the end of May. So people will introduce the survey and the concepts in the survey during that meeting, and that'll be recorded. So people will, if they choose to, have the opportunity to either attend or watch later before they take the survey. So they'll have a little bit more context than the university community will. But the university community is very smart, so they should have less of an issue, I think, interpreting things.
I also, honestly, too, the visuals, even if people aren't using them, it makes people read things more. And people stay with it. They have pretty pictures along the way, even if they're not. It's just people just finish a survey. If it's just they get up, open a survey, it's just all text. They lots of times won't do that. It will stick with it. They're just so, unfortunately, it's true. They will, even if they don't really use the pictures, they will tend to move through if there's visuals in there.
Okay. All right, well, it's 7:30, so I don't want to keep anyone, sorry, for you guys, 6:30 Central, sorry about that. And I don't want to keep you guys any longer than we need to, but if you guys could provide feedback, any comments you want to send by email by Thursday, we'll be meeting a smaller group. We'll be meeting on Thursday to try to wrap this up. So if you could send by like early Thursday, that'd be great. Specifically regarding the survey, if you have comments about the public engagement plan, that can be a little bit later. But questions or comments about the survey, please try to send by Thursday.
Our next meeting is when, Boris?
Let's see, it's once a month. Adam, do you know the date of the next one? Should be in about a month.
The reason I'm asking is because we would like to get if we could get the feedback for any engagement stakeholders and stuff, really try to think about the next 2 weeks. If we could get them by like end of next week, like May, was that May 4th or something, 5th? That would be great, because then we can make sure it's in there. You guys have it ahead of time to look at it, and we can, the plan can always be added to. It'd be really nice to have a really comprehensive plan as we're starting to get the survey out to make sure we're really reaching everybody.
Okay, that works. So if you have comments about the survey itself, please try to send it by early Thursday. If you have comments about the public engagement plan, you have until the end of next week.
This is Gary Weber. I had a kind of a meta question. I think I'm supposed to be representing the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods, which is a pretty large group of administrators and neighborhood advocates. And I feel a little uncomfortable representing them without any idea of how they might feel about these documents and these survey questions. If you sent this, it came out today, so we got it the day of the meeting, which is impossible for me to send it out to my constituents and say, does this survey look good to you? Do you want that information? If so, can you get it to me a few days earlier so I can send it out to the listserv and people could comment?
Yeah.
I don't think we want you to distribute this before we're ready to distribute it. I think we're asking you as a stakeholder, help us take a look at this and comment.
That's clear.
And then once we have a survey established, then I think that's where we want you to reach out to your stakeholders to say, help us collect the information.
Thanks, Jessica. That's clear. I misunderstood.
But Gary, that is still a good point, because there's so many sort of moving parts just right now in ramping things up to get the Lawrence Listens thing working and to get these graphics put together. So once we kind of get past that and get to the actual focusing on the service and the service analysis and the service recommendations, those will have a lot more lead time before you see these pieces. We're just trying to get everything ramped up right now. So I do apologize. I was hoping actually that we would be able to even look at the Lawrence Listens site tonight, but that didn't work out. So we're doing our best, and we'll continue to hopefully do our best.
But can I ask a clarifying question? This is Kim from the Sustainability Office, also representing the Food Policy Council. So along the same lines, the question of Gary, or at least my interpretation of Gary's question was, if I'm being a relaying stakeholder from the Health Equity Working Group of the Food Policy Council, it's appropriate for me to ask their advice on the survey, correct? And relay back to you? I mean, I feel like I would need their input in addition to myself being a group of experts.
I mean, I think it's appropriate. I think, the feedback that we're really looking for you guys to bring back to us from a larger audience is once we start getting into the survey results, or the survey itself, the survey results, the recommendations, the service analysis. Right now, we're hoping that you guys kind of have a sense of your various, clients, constituents, whatever, and can represent them on these decisions of how do we even get started? How do we approach these different groups? So I think it's a case-by-case basis. If you feel like you need to ask people you work with for feedback, feel free. But definitely, we would like everyone to do that once we have analysis and recommendations to discuss.
Okay, I think I got it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all. We ran a little bit over. And yeah, feel free to send your feedback over the next couple of days and next couple of weeks. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.